Okay. Well, I think we might make a start, Maxi. So welcome everybody to today's webinar. Our guest speaker today is Maxi Schmidt. She's going to talk us through how to measure customer experience performance and prove ROI. Maxi is a principal analyst at Forrester and has been in her role for 11 years. My name is Charlie West and I'm an experience and insight consultant at InMoment, and I'll be your MC for today. I've been at InMoment now for about a year. Before that, I headed up the Global Customer Experience Program at Dyson for 5 years. So I'm really looking forward to Maxi's presentation today. We always talk about CX programs driving ROI, whether that's increasing revenue, reducing churn or cutting costs. But as a CX practitioner, it can actually be really difficult to build those models within your own business. And I know just how difficult it is from experience to get the right data, the right metrics, or develop a model and prove that return of investment on CX initiatives within a business, although it's really valuable and it's really brilliant for engaging the wider business. So I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Maxi Schmidt as our guest speaker. As I said, she's principal analyst within Forrester's customer experience practice. She leads Forrester's research on CX measurement and value for the customer. And in her role, she advises leaders on how to build effective CX measurement in programs, make the case for CX, and co-create value with her customers. Max is also a frequent keynote speaker at conferences and leads CX workshops at events. Before joining Forrester, she was a management consultant at Simon Kucher & Partners, where she led global engagements with firms across industries to improve products and pricing and drive pricing process and governance. So just before I hand over to Maxi, just a note to say we've saved some time at the end for Q&A, so please drop any questions you have into the Q&A window. So with that, I will hand over to Maxi. Thanks, Maxi.
Thank you, Charlie. I see some known faces or names in the participants. I'm excited to see you again. And I'm excited to see everybody else in this webinar. Charlie mentioned that I've been doing the work around customer experience measurement for a good long while at Forrester. And I want to share with you today how we suggest you go about measuring customer experience and proving ROI. Because the thing that Charlie started with, the proving the ROI, is not going to work without the right measurement program in place. And the right measurement program is to create a right measurement program, you have to think a little bit like you think about painting. And this is maybe odd because you're like, oh, measurement is science and painting is art. What do you mean, Maxi? But really, really good painting depends a lot on great science. Like, so the best painters, they need to know about perspectives, about colors and chemicals, and how to paint a painting that lasts, how to paint a painting that's vivid and looks right, looks interesting. And to do that, they need a lot of science. But in the end, the goal of a painting is to move people to do something, to move people to feel something. And that's the exact same thing with measurement. Measurement also relies on a lot of science, on the right metrics, on the right analytics. But in the end, that's not the point of measurement. The point of measurement is to move people to do something, to make them feel something about customers that then makes them do something. And that's why, to me, these two topics go really well together, painting and measurement. When you talk about customer experience measurement, that's really the art and science of quantifying customer experience quality and linking it to organizational metrics and decision-making. I mentioned that I've done this job for a little bit, and when I look at the development over the last 10-ish or so years, you see that there is a lot of amazing improvements happening in measurement, but there's also still a lot of immaturity. I brought a little question for you. This is not a poll you have to fill out, don't worry about it, but think about your own programs. Think about your own customer experience measurement maturity. Like a really awesome program moves people, and not so mature program maybe doesn't move people yet. Where would you rate your own program's maturity? Just think about it for a second. And I'll show you now where others and your peers have said their program is. So Forrester does a regular survey among people who say that they need measurement and voice of customer efforts. And when we asked them about the maturity of the program, thank you very much for being in here. I know I'm not supposed to mention names, but you know that you weighed in by saying medium to high. So we have actually a number more people in your maturity. You can see that about 15% that they have very high maturity in their programs. What we also see is that about half of programs say that they really see room for improving this customer experience measurement maturity. And some of the top challenges that people tell us they have are difficulty linking customer experience metrics to business metrics, lack of collaboration and buy-in from other departments, lack of budget, and lack of effective tools to use for the measurement program and technology. Now, just one thing that I found super interesting when you look at this data. The first part, difficulty linking CX metrics to business metrics. You'd think that gets better as programs get older, right? But this challenge was even more pronounced in programs that are between 6 and 9 years old. So it gets harder to make these links for some of these programs, probably because of the complexity of the program. But that to me was really interesting. So there's always room to do this better, and it doesn't necessarily get easier. But with what we talk about today, I hope that there'll be a bit more, that you'll take some things away to make it easier for you. I also have a few other data points I wanted to share with you when it comes to that buy-in hurdle that we talked about earlier. The way that I want to show you this data is that imagine we're in a village where only CX measurement leaders live, and we have like 100 people in that village, okay? So I'll show you now data from our customer experience measurement panel, customer experience measurement leader panel, and I'll tell you if we were a village of 100 CX people, how many say that they actually agree with certain things. So the first thing is that really good news, 70 out of 100 CX people in the CX measurement village say that the organization believes the program is vital for success. That's super. But only 43 say that the organization is confident in the CX metrics. That I find that troubling. Only 32 say that the program is well understood, and only 26 say that customer feedback and metrics are used to inform all decisions. So here you can see where some of the immaturity comes from that people ascribe to their own program. To have a great program, you need to do 3 things well. You need to track customer experience metrics. That's the basis of any measurement program, understanding what these measures are to gauge CX quality. The second thing you need to do is embed these metrics in decision-making. And that means to make stakeholders accountable and empower them to do something with the insights. And the third thing you need to do is prove the value of investing in customer experience with a compelling and interesting business case. Now, the reason why prove the value is all around here, and the reason why track customer experience metrics is in the middle, is that in my experience, when I look at maturity, when I ask people to do our customer experience measurement maturity assessment, the metrics are often the thing that's maybe not perfect, but okay enough. So there isn't all that much to be gained in improving the metrics. And there is a bit to be gained, but there's more to be gained in thinking about how can I use these metrics to move people and how can I use the metrics to prove the value of investing in customer experience. But what is to be gained in tracking customer experience metrics is actually really important for doing these other 2 things. So what I'm going to show you now is we're going to go through each of these tasks. I'm going to share with you data on the state of the CX measurement based on the panel I already introduced earlier. I'm going to share with you a few frameworks, how to think about doing this better. And I'm going to share with you a few tools. For the tools, these slides might look quite full, but you get these slides after, so you have access to these tools, whether you're a Forrester customer or not. And if you're a Forrester customer, you have access to them through your Forrester membership, of course. So let's talk about that first one, tracking customer experience metrics. We need to track customer experience metrics to help us answer 3 questions. How good is customer experience? What should we do to improve it? And how would we benefit from improving it? And the theme with what we have to do better here in order to enable us to do the other 2 tasks, that theme is robustness. So we've been kind of living on a diet of white bread, an apple, and red wine. I don't know if I can call red wine a diet, but let's assume it's grape juice. So we've been living on this diet, and we need to get better and more robust data about customer experiences. At Forrester, we have a framework to help you think about what kind of metrics you need. And I want to introduce that framework to you, and then I'll tell you how much we see this framework actually being happening in reality. So the framework I want to talk about is that you need to measure customer experience on 3 levels using 3 types of metrics, and I'll explain why. The 3 levels are relationship level, that's the overall experience of the organization. The touchpoint level, that's an individual contact and a journey, and the journey level. The relationship level is really important because most often it's correlated to behaviors. The touchpoint level is really important because that gives you very specific ideas what to improve. At checkout, on the website, in whatever touchpoint and channel we're talking about. The journey layer is important because it brings together touchpoints. It helps you understand how customers feel about a customer journey they're going through. So here is the other side, 3 types of metrics. So for each of those levels, we need to measure perception metrics that measure how people feel about the experience. You can see a few examples: satisfaction, ease, confidence, and so on. We also need to measure outcome metrics, so what people do as a result of the experience. That includes intended outcomes like NPS, but it also includes actual outcomes like, are they churning? Are they calling again and costing us money? And the third type of metric is the interaction metrics that are all about what happens during interactions. And they include the kinds of wait time, the number of journeys you go through, if journeys are successful, and so on. So this is kind of the objective stuff that happens. That tells us if we know that, and if we know how customers feel about that, and if we know what they do as a result. So if we link them, we can make a business case. And I'll give you an example in a second about how to do that. But first, let me tell you a little bit about how well we're already doing when you use this framework as the ideal customer experience measurement framework. When we asked the panel where they're tracking, we saw that relationship and touchpoint tracking is standard, fine. But journey tracking is a real problem. Most companies do this too little. And even the ones that do this, based on my experience, they don't do this in ways that are super robust. When you look at the types of metrics, you see that perception metrics are the one that most people track, and that's because those are the metrics that a customer experience team often owns. But you can see that for relationship level, there's more a bent towards outcome metrics. So that includes like NPS, for example, but it also includes churn. And for the touchpoint level, there's more a bent towards interaction metrics. So how much time did people wait and so on. And I see a question here. I'll defer that to the Q&A because there's nothing I can answer quickly, but we've seen that question. Okay. When you think about these 3 levels, of course, they go together to a measurement architecture. So this is an example of an energy company. You see the 3 levels here, and each of those levels, you have the energy customers, the relationship, and you should measure these 3 types of metrics. The journey level is, for example, I join, I pay, I move, I get help. And you should again measure all of these 3 levels. And then the touchpoint level, like within pay, for example, is the meter is read, I receive the bill, I pay the bill. And you need to measure all 3 types of metrics. So this is how you turn that framework, that 9-box, into an actual measurement architecture. What we see currently, as I already showed you, is that not many of these fields on that 9-box are, not all the fields are being measured. And what we also see is that there is a dependence on surveys and limited insights into metrics linkages. I'm going again back to our village. So imagine 100 huts with a CX measurement leader in each. And we find is that 59 of those say they identify the operational drivers of customer experience. Sounds pretty good, but it's still pretty low, right? 38 say that they link operational data, perceptions, and behaviors at the customer individual level. That is hard, but it is prerequisite to be able to make the business case and to analyze, to do more advanced analysis. 26 say that they pre-test survey questions with customers. I'm quickly going to jump on my soapbox. If you don't pre-test your survey questions with customers, talk to me. That's not acceptable. And the last one is only 25 track survey questions as in perception metrics without surveys. That's very little, but understandable because it's very hard to get sentiment analysis and so on really accepted internally. And also we can talk about it a little bit more. So as you're thinking about this now, the first tool I want to leave you with, and again, this is a tool that you can just print out and fill in, is this inventory, metrics inventory. Think about what metrics you're already measuring at these 3 levels. Are you measuring at these 3 levels? And if you are measuring at these 3 levels, what metrics are you measuring and where do you have gaps? Again, if you're a Forrester customer, there's a tool on Forrester.com that you can access, but you can also access this right now from the presentation itself. Very important is that you not only fill out where you're measuring and what you're measuring, but also think about whether you're actually linking these metrics to each other. The second tool that I want to leave you with is something that I got asked about a lot. Like in this measurement architecture earlier, where's a beacon metric and what should our beacon metric be? And is NPS the right beacon metric? So when we ask about beacon metrics, you need to confirm that your beacon metric is effective. You can look at what others use, and you can see on the left-hand side here, most people that we asked say that companies use NPS as a beacon metric, followed by satisfaction, and then a customer effort score. To know whether your beacon metric is right, check out the right-hand side. We have a checklist for you that you can use, where you can say, okay, we have our current beacon metric, we have other things that maybe a CEO is suggesting, something that I feel really passionate about. Put them into this checklist and compare how well they're doing against each other. Again, that's a tool that's available, but you can also use this directly from the presentation. Now, one thing that I want to put a plug in for is future-proofing your program by focusing on customer journeys. I'll speak much more about it on October in London at the InMoment conference, but this is a super great, promising is probably better, a super promising way to think about measuring customer experience and also making it in ways that you can prove the impact. I'll go back to an example that I think is super interesting, and that's the AIB example. AIB looked at various journeys at an Irish bank. And for example, they looked at the loans journey for business customers, and they were able to put data into one place that brings together interaction metrics. So how long does it take to decide on a loan? Or how long do customers have to wait? They brought together perception metrics, satisfaction, for example, and they brought together outcome metrics. So that's the conversion rate and the NPS. And by having that in one place, because those guys have just an awesome data platform, they could show the link between the decision time, the satisfaction, and the conversion and NPS, and could make the case that it's imperative to improve this journey in order to achieve higher conversion. So again, I'll talk more about journey and the journey measurement and how we use this to make a business case in London in October. Now, very specific, or like tomorrow, how do you get started with this? So 3 recommendations. Check if you have the right CX beacon metric. Inventory your metrics to figure out where you have gaps. And then, if you haven't done this yet, pick 1 or 2 journeys and just start piloting your journey measurement. Come to London, maybe if you want to hear more, or be in touch otherwise if you want to hear more about journey measurement. We have a lot of research on that. But do this for 1 or 2 journeys. The next big thing was embedding customer experience metrics in decision-making. That means that you need to provide access to customer experience metrics. You need to make sure that people are thinking about customer experience and not scores. You need to make sure that you can facilitate improvements. And also you want to make sure that you can set targets properly. So let me talk about what's the theme here. The theme I want to leave you with is this. Who can recognize what this is? Give you a second to think about it. Thank you for the feedback about speaking slower. I will do so. So can you see what this is? Maybe you can see it now. Maybe you can recognize it now. Yes, I'm sure you can. This is the girl with a pearl earring. Exactly. Yes, exactly. The reason why I'm showing this is that this is such a well-known painting and it's so beautiful, but the way that we sometimes handle metrics blurs customers in our stakeholders' eyes. So the theme I want to talk about is connection. We sometimes use metrics and then we talk about, oh, our NPS is 42, our satisfaction is 4.3, the number of unhappy customers is X, but all of that is not connecting people to the customers, to the actual people that we try to do this customer experience thing for. It kind of puts a little bit of a wall between us and customers. And so when you're thinking about embedding metrics in decision-making, an important part of that is creating more connection between stakeholders and customers. And of course, also creating connection between stakeholders because they all need to work together to improve the experience. In this case, where we see, when we're back in our measurement village, we see good and bad stuff. We see that 69% would say that they're generating insights into the why behind CX metrics. That's good. 57% say that they share metrics in ways that stakeholders find highly engaging. This is self-reported. I don't know how big this number would be if we asked stakeholders. 53% say they set targets for all metrics. And 46% say that they identify employee behaviors that contribute to better customer experience. That's a problem, because if you only tell people here's the score and we don't tell anybody what they need to do to improve it, we're not getting to any improvement. And here, a key concept that I think you need to be thinking about is the concept of the actionability. In many cases, what I hear is that a person in the customer experience team gets pushback from stakeholders who say, your insights need to be more actionable. And this is due to a misunderstanding what actionability means. Because a stakeholder might want to know exactly what they should be doing. That, however, is not the job of a customer experience team. Let's separate this process of creating actionability out a little bit, and I will say what I mean. So you have a starting point, there is a metric. For example, our score for the slow talking score is low, right? That could be the metric. And that's very interesting, but it doesn't help me much, right? Maybe I need an insight. Okay, I need to do more contextual analysis. And I'll go away from the slow talking example because that only gets us so far. But think about, for example, the scores in a specific region are low. So there's an insight. Not all scores are low of customers, that not all customers find us hard to do business with, but customers in a specific region find us hard to do business with. That's the context. And this is something that a customer experience team should own and usually owns. But then we get to a much, much broader step. We get to understanding the root causes, where we have to do some analysis and understand why are the scores bad in a certain region. That requires people who are knowledgeable about the business to step in. So maybe we find out that all of the salespeople in that region were recently reassigned to other accounts. That might be a root cause. Customer experience team probably does not know about this easily. The business stakeholders do. And then the last step is to get from there to a solution, like trying to figure out what can we do about this. So there's a really long way from metrics to solutions, and we need to have a handoff of sorts where a customer experience team or an insights team or a survey team or a voice of customer team says, here's how far I can take this. And here in the second part, like root cause to solution, I'm happy to be a facilitator, but I can't do these things by myself. I need you to do them. So then the actionable insight is actually created together between the customer experience team and the stakeholders. So you're creating something new together, as opposed to taking an insight and delivering it to a stakeholder. Which is a great point for another tool I want to share with you. This one is about dashboards. We often get the question, what should a dashboard look like? So we put together a really simple overview of the blocks that you should have on a dashboard. And this is specifically more of an executive level dashboard. So if you're having an executive level dashboard, use this as a check to see whether you have all of these blocks on there. And if you need to create one, use this as a starting point. You have to have, you see that top and left, obviously customer experience performance overall, but you also have to have some key takeaways. If I see yet another dashboard that has no story, no key takeaways, I am not surprised that it's not working well. You should not leave it up to the audience to decide what the dashboard means. You are telling a story. You're curating a dashboard that tells that story. So the overall performance and the key takeaways. Bringing back that customer that we need more connection with, like unblurring the customer, happens through positive and negative verbatims. On the right-hand side, the blue stuff is about connecting to stakeholders who can find themselves in these performance metrics. And those might be performance of certain touch points, performance of certain channels, where, for example, the owner of a channel can say, there's my metric. Or it might be operational metrics that people are aware of and know. So that's how you get the connection to the internal stakeholder. And then the connection to progress is on the bottom left. So you want to show we're doing things. And here's how we're doing on these initiatives for customer experience that we're currently on. And then the maybe most important part is the bottom right. And when I say most important part, I mean the thing that you might not do, but I want you to do. And that is make a dashboard interesting. In the end, if you have a monthly dashboard, it will look pretty much the same every time in most cases. So already by curating a bit this dashboard, telling your story, you'll make it look different. But by including a little box about what happened, is a journey deep dive, a qualitative research deep dive, an interesting video that you found, an insight that nobody knew that surprises people. That's the kind of thing that makes people want to come back and look at what you're doing there. Second tool, target setting. I mentioned this. I wanted to just drive by quickly, do this in these steps, right? First, check the baseline. We often see that executives say, oh, the target should be X, but if the baseline is trending down, your target will probably not be 20 points above it. Then check what are you doing to actually improve the target, improve the scores. If you're not having any improvement initiatives in flight, target is most likely, you can't set a higher target than you are at currently. Then also check what you have in terms of how high should the target be. So that's that financial linkage. Maybe you don't want to be above 85% satisfaction because there's too much to invest and not enough return on investment. And then finally, set target ranges. Again, we can talk about this separately. There's a lot to talk about target setting. We also have a tool for that. But keep in mind that you need to start from the baseline and think about what you're planning to improve, as opposed to just setting targets that sound good, like 17.7. And when you are thinking about connection again, I want to go back to the accountability. So the accountability for metrics is by trying to define metrics for individual functions that are supporting customer experience. This example is from Ingredion. I really respect Daniel's work at Ingredion. And he has worked with the different functions within Ingredion to identify metrics that affect the key things the customers are doing, the key customer journeys. And these metrics are now on functional scorecards, even of functions that are behind the scenes, like supply chain planning. So here's some example here. Supply chain planning, they have an NPS goal, but they also have goals that they call the internal functional metrics. So those are operational metrics, or remember these interaction metrics that help us understand what happens in the experience. They have targets that are based on customer feedback from a survey. And I think it's really interesting, they also have targets that are about the contribution to customer experience improvement projects. This is a really good example of how you take a high-level customer experience score, like, for example, NPS, you then translate it into the different journeys that customers are going through. You decide what is important in these journeys and how would you measure it, and then you assign owners to that. And then you basically look across the whole measurement architecture. Oh, this metric, and this metric should be owned by this function, and you put it on that function scorecard. So this approach is an approach that I think is highly repeatable for you and really interesting. But as you're doing this, we talk a lot about scores and target setting. I do want to reinforce something I said earlier. Please don't focus people too much on the scores. Remember, we talked about blurring the customer so that we don't have a clear view of a customer anymore. We just see the scores. And you can do a number of things to do that. I want to bring one example from Joe Bramata. He's the global head of customer experience at Shell. And I think he's doing really amazing work at Shell. I have a quote from him that I really like that I want to read to you. My challenge this year has been educating and changing the mindset in the entire organization. We used to say customer satisfaction index, but that makes stakeholders think of a score. Now we say customer experience performance, and it's a different, better way of framing it. It makes us and stakeholders think who needs to deliver, which is the next step in our organization, how do we self-organize in the program, and how can we deliver key experiences in key journey steps. So, for example, if you have a program, don't allow anybody to use a shortcut. If you, for example, happen to measure NPS, don't allow anybody to call this the NPS program. This is the customer experience program. NPS just happens to be the metric you use to measure it. Don't use these shortcuts yourself, and also try to correct people. Not like the language police, you don't have to be all German about it. Only I get to be all German about it. But try to get people to say things like customer experience performance, or we do these things in order to improve customer experience, not we do these things in order to improve metric X or Y. And while we're at it, I want to also ask you to try to avoid linking customer experience metrics to pay incentives. The way I think about it is that if I ask employees, or if I say to employees, if you're customer-centric, I'll give you a bonus. That's the same as asking or telling a pilot, so if you'll be so kind to land the plane, you'll get a bonus. Landing the plane is part of the job. We're not going around the plane in the air and collecting money to make sure the pilot actually lands the plane. The same way customer experience and customer centricity should be part of the job of people. And if we actually pay them extra for that. The message we send is that it's not part of the job. It's something that you can do extra if you choose, if you need the money, if you want to, right? Instead, we should do what I talked about earlier, translating what customer experience means into employee behaviors, making sure that they know what they have to do in order to improve experience, and then let the score take care of itself. Okay. Now we've talked about tracking better, right? We've talked about embedding customer experience insights. And like in the first part, I wanted to give you a few pointers on how to get started with this embedding. So the first thing is think about that handoff between you and stakeholders. That handoff along that spectrum from metrics to insights to root cause to solution. This handoff will differ depending on what kind of company you are. For example, at SAP has business experts, they call them business satellites, in the customer experience team. So they can go a bit further down the line because they know the business really well, and they can go further down the line towards the action part. In other companies, you have a customer experience or VOC team that does not have any business members. So they'll probably stay up a bit further in the front of that spectrum that I showed you earlier. So think about what the right point is for you and agree with stakeholders on where that handoff is. The second thing is take one journey and try to think about what are the metrics that we're measuring along this journey, and then how would we translate them into metrics that you could put on the scorecards of different functions or even down to employees. And lastly, go ahead and check where you, maybe inadvertently, promote score obsession, just maybe by using language certain ways or through other means. If you track metrics better, if you embed metrics better, you will also have more luck in that next one, and that's proving the value of investing in customer experience. To prove the value of investing in customer experience, you need to do two things. You need to develop compelling business cases that show decision makers it's worth it, persuade them. But you also have to create defensible and sophisticated models of that link. So the theme I want to leave you here with is this. This is me on Twitter, or was me on Twitter or X or whatever. I was shouting into the void. And this is something that I see many people in customer experience do too. They're shouting into the void. Customer experience is really important. And like with my 3 followers, nothing comes back. So to get more followers and to stop shouting into the void, you need kind of the gravity around the customer experience topic. And I want to make a very specific point here. We have a lot of research around making the business case for customer experience. And based on the last 10 years of doing that research, I've noticed something. And what you need to do, of course, right, is tying the customer experience perceptions to improve business outcomes. Much like the example I mentioned earlier from AIB. Much like you're being asked to do anyway. And this is really hard to do because it's hard to get the data about experiences and the data about behaviors in the same kind of granularity. Much of what we see people try to do is doing some high-level correlations. Our NPS is correlated to our growth. What I'm here to tell you is that, among others, is that if you break this down in a more granular fashion, if you, for example, do this analysis not at a global level, but at a country level, or even at a sales office level, you have a higher chance to manage the correlation. And what I recommend as a way to do this even better is to try to make a business case at the journey level. Again, I'll speak more about the journey business case when in October in London. But there's one problem in making the business case for customer experience, and that is the problem of what is that relationship between customer experience and business metrics, because that's not always the same relationship. We have found, based on our own customer experience index, where we measure customer experience, that growth and customer experience quality sometimes move in lockstep. So the higher the customer experience index, the higher the growth. But sometimes also it's not the case. Sometimes this is diminishing. So I get the highest gains from improving bad experiences, not from making happy customers even happier. And sometimes that relationship is exponential. So where I really need to make happy customers even happier. Here are a few industries that fall in there. So in the middle you have credit cards. By the way, you also have wireless providers. So on the right-hand side, you have banking, financial services. And it's really important for you to think about that. If you're measuring NPS, it's important to think about this even a step further. So NPS, you see on the x-axis, the kind of the the scale of NPS, and on the y-axis, you see the business metrics that matter. Have you plotted this for your own company? If you haven't plotted this, you should, because ideally the curve goes something like this, right? Detractors have the lowest business impact, passives higher, and promoters higher. But we've seen other curves. We've seen a curve like this. I've seen this curve. I've seen this curve. And that's all not a big problem. The problem is just if you assume that you have a certain curve that you don't have. So check out what your own curve is. And if you're making the business case, I'll leave you with another tool. Again, I don't need to go into this in detail. You can take this and copy this slide and start filling in this business case on a page so you can communicate about customer experience improvements or projects. So how do you get started with this? Confirm that stakeholders actually care about the business metrics that you use. Remember that right-hand side, do you use the right business metrics? I often find that's not the case. Find experiences like, for example, Journey, where you have the metrics about perceptions and metrics about behaviors at the customer individual level, and then create that one-page business case. And if you do all this, these three themes will hopefully be easier for you to achieve. Robustness in tracking, connection as you're embedding, and gravity as you're proving the value. Now, this is not all something that you do from one day to the other. We have a lot of research on maturity of customer experience measurement. This is a super high-level summary of the stages that programs usually go through. And you can use this also to go back to your offices and think about where you are on the spectrum. And when you find out, let me know, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that, because I'm really hoping that together we can make measurement even better in the future. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Maxi. That was absolutely fantastic. Really good, and I learned a lot. So, and I wish I'd listened to this when I was still in my role at Dyson. Would have been very helpful. Does anybody have any questions? I think the one question I did have at the beginning was from Michaelan, and it was, would customer feedback be used for retrospective analysis? When planning a CX initiative, how could I incorporate customer feedback, and when? And when?
Yes. So most customer feedback is always used for retrospective. And Michaelan, if you want to clarify a bit more, if I'm not making sense in my answer, do so. I saw that you already commented on studying, so let me know. But I mean, that it's always retrospective, right? The question is, to get more proactive, what you have to do is you have to understand what decisions are going to be made in the near future, because I think this is really where you can play. You can, instead of finding out afterwards that things are not going well and trying to get people to change them, a little bit like, hey, here's an insight, would you please fix this? Instead, think about how can I influence decisions that are happening. So for example, if the digital team meets every Monday for a stand-up to think about what needs to be improved on the website, maybe you can use that day to give them insights specifically about that, as opposed to giving them insights whenever you have them, but you take the decision-making cadence of your internal customers, and then you give them the the data they need to make better decisions that are more customer-centric.
Brilliant, thank you. And I was just thinking, there was an interesting comment actually from Gary about kind of like saying much of the journey measurement takes place after the purchase. Measurement of those who do not buy gives you a whole new set of data. And I thought that was quite an interesting point.
I agree with you. A lot of the measurement already takes place with people who are willing to give us feedback, right? And we've seen attempts of people to try to do lever surveys. And this is where the other data sources come in, the robustness, right? Because the people who aren't buying might still leave you a review why they aren't buying. Gary, that's exactly the point. But I want to just make one thing is that journeys can also be about selecting something. So the journey doesn't always have to be an existing customer. So you can have prospect journeys, so that they're not always happening after buying. But the point being is that we need to expand the feedback we collect to people who are unhappy with us. Like we need to try to get more of those people, as opposed to relying on the ones that are taking our surveys, who are most likely more engaged anyway.
Yes, and they can be the most difficult ones to try and get feedback from, those who aren't actually buying. Trying to get any data
that's why
can be tricky.
Actually, can I weigh in there? That's why I cannot understand why people are doing follow-ups on surveys only for people, like depending on how the score was. You often see this. How would you score us? Oh, I'm so sad the score is so, or sorry, the score is so low, what did we do poorly? Or, oh, the score is great, what did you like? But you should be asking your fans what you're doing well and what you're not doing well, because the people who are really happy with you will have an opinion on what they'd like to have changed. Now, I know that still doesn't get to people who don't buy from you, but at least gets you closer to understanding what your fans actually appreciate and what they'd like you to do better. Because there's a lot of people who would be like, yeah, I'd recommend them. And then in the open text, they might, you know, you're kind of cool, but lately I've really been wondering about the people that you have in that bank branch. But they'd still recommend you. So you need to find out from your fans what they would improve to stay your fans.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there is another question in the chat from Hugo, which says, since NPS is a metric with some weaknesses that are widely recognized in academia, how can we create more robust models with CX metrics? That's a very interesting question.
Yes. Can I say it? There's a two-part answer to this, okay? Yes, NPS has weaknesses as a metric itself. The biggest weakness, however, lies in how it's implemented. So if you're already using NPS and you're not happy with it, first look, do you do driver analysis? Do you actually ask customers for more inputs? Do you have systemic improvements? Do you have a measurement architecture underneath, like I showed earlier? And if that is all not the case, then your energy is really well spent in trying to build these things out, especially because there's often so much push to keep NPS. So now I'm being very pragmatic, but why spend your time fighting against windmills if you can spend your time on building out a measurement architecture and a measurement system around NPS that measures the three types of metrics? Remember, NPS is an outcome metric. So add perception metrics, add interaction metrics, and help you understand how NPS moves and why. So I'm kind of basically telling you to sidestep the issue a little bit, unless you have a lot of internal pushback against it. And then, of course, it's a different question. So there's really only three reasons not to go with the thing that the executives ask for, right? Either NPS is inversely correlated to business results, which if you found that out, you have a good story. Your employees hate NPS. We know from some insurances where employees were like, oh, the third implementation of NPS, can't stand it anymore, and they went somewhere else. Or your customers find the question highly offensive. So if you work in utility setting, for example, customers find this question sometimes offensive when you're not in a competitive environment. Or financial services customers sometimes don't like this question. But I mean, you know, there's kind of, it's more about how you implement the whole system of measurement, do journey measurement properly.
Absolutely, all about the action and not necessarily just the question. So there are a couple of interrelated questions in the chat as well. One, is there a way to drive up the number of surveys completed? But then secondly, some people get tired of surveys. How have you seen some good examples of getting feedback data without surveys that actually work? Not just in theory, but really work at scale.
Yes, so I'm going to go back to a slide I showed you earlier, because I think this is really helpful in context. So I'm going to answer the question around the replacement of surveys first, and then we're going to then we're talking about the question, how do I get response rates up? Okay, so just where I've seen success is mostly at the touch point level. So I see a big credit card company using sentiment to figure out whether calls are going well or poorly. I see a big retailer using digital analytics to figure out if experiences were frustrating or not. And this works at scale, but this works because at that level, we have a lot of data about what customers are doing. And how this works is that we infer from what customers are doing and what they're saying as they're doing things, we infer how good their experience is. And that works. Where I've seen that work much less is the higher we go there. So at the relationship level, I rarely see anybody who could tell me what is the happiness of a customer with me as a company overall. It's just too hard to do this, and we have not enough good data for this. So that's maybe so there are actual examples, but mostly at that level, which means that now you can use your survey real estate differently. Maybe you don't need the IVR survey after, for example, somebody calls and gets declined for a claim or whatever it is, because you already know that they're unhappy. So this is just an example, but think about where could you replace surveys with other ways of getting a good feel whether an experience was good or bad, and then use your survey real estate somewhere else. You can't use data so easily. I'm not going to say easily, sorry, but that you can't use data to understand.
Really good point.
That second part with how do you get people to fill out surveys? So I think of surveys like wine, right? If you drink 1 glass, it's great. If you drink 2 glasses, it's greater. If you drink 3 glasses, it's greatest. And if you drink 4 glasses, it's not so great anymore. If you drink 5 glasses, it's terrible. For me, it's probably half a glass, 1 glass, and so on and so on, right? Depends on what your tolerance is. So we need to first think about the survey real estate that I just talked about, so that you don't send surveys and tire out people when you don't really need this. Because the problem with survey fatigue is, I think, the 2 key reasons, right? The first is post-traumatic stress syndrome. If you've ever taken a customer experience survey, you know what I'm talking about. They're usually long and selfish and interrogative and annoying and radio buttons, and we all do this, and we're creating stress in customers. The second is that people don't see anything happen. And for that second, you can do something about it. I mean, the first one, you can also do something. Keep your own surveys in order. Do better. Don't spoil it for everybody else. You should all work together to not spoil it for everybody else. But for the second part, for the kind of people don't see that you're doing something with it, I have an awesome example. So if you want to look me up on LinkedIn, you don't have to, but there's an example I posted there about Cambridge Savings Bank. Cambridge Savings Bank is a bank in the US where I used to live, and they sent me an email saying a survey would come my way. And in the email, they said, your feedback is valuable, like we all do. But then they said, and here are 3 concrete things we've done with feedback in the past 6 months. I'm like, oh, I've been saying this forever, we should do this. Now somebody finally is doing this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So you can start to create trust in your customers that when they fill in a survey, you're actually going to do something about it. But that trust will be hard to build. So you build it, but try not to screw it up as you build it by ignoring customers. So that's a kind of the long and short of it. And then did I also say that you need to pre-test your surveys? You really need to pre-test your surveys with customers, because your surveys are most likely not good enough. There's survey checklists that we have at Forrester that you can use if you're a customer, and if you're not a customer, just call me and I'll set you up with an abbreviated version of it. Your surveys probably aren't good, and they're not giving you good information, and then they're not creating good respondent experiences. So start with the hygiene and then work your way up to building the trust.
Good advice. Good. Cool. We've got another couple of questions come through, Maxi. So the first one is, how do we measure the customer delighted, not just satisfied?
So it depends, right? Whether you even want them to be delighted. That's a big discussion when we talk back about, remember that slide I showed you? Wait a second, I'm going there so you can see it. For this slide, if you are a bank, you probably want to measure if you delight customers. If you are a credit card company or a wireless provider, I wouldn't care whether you're delighting customers. You just need to make sure that you're not making them really unhappy. But if you want to measure that, you can do, or what I recommend is that you try to define what delight means. The word delight gets thrown around a lot. But delight, what does it mean to delight me? As a bank customer, is it maybe confidence in my financial decisions? Is it that I feel like you're on my side? So do the work of actually figuring out how you delight your customers. Ask customers who say they're delighted, what is it that they're delighted about? Because then you get to some real tangible kind of things that drive delight that you can measure. Because measuring delight itself sometimes creates the adverse reaction in customers. I had that from an airline once. Was your flight great, outstanding? I'm like, dude, you're a flight. This is not a spa. Leave me alone, right? So try to figure out what delight means. And delight might just be, please don't screw it up. And then when you know what delight means, you can start measuring it.
And because also sometimes if you want to aim for delight and then you're not getting it, then you're setting yourself up for failure, because actually it can be really difficult to delight people in different circumstances.
Yes. There is an example of a company, a German company, a German automotive company that spoke at a conference, and they are measuring, they're trying to measure delight by figuring out whether you have exceeded customer expectations. So I can share that with you. That's a way of doing this, but it's also, again, right? Delight means exceeding expectations. So that's what's being measured. Again, back to what I just said, figure out what delight even means and then start measuring it.
Oh, and then I think we'll just take this as the very last question around not being dangerous to measure NPS for touch points, but the C-suite tends to compare that then with relationship NPS, which isn't comparable. And the question is, what's the trend? So I'm not quite sure I would know what the trend would be, but any thoughts on that? I know I've certainly seen that in previous roles.
I mean, first we had the normal NPS, the relationship NPS. Then somebody thought, oh, we should have a system and also have touchpoint NPS. And then people are like, oh, this is so confusing. I mean, you could see this coming, right? We've seen this movie, the train wreck was in the making. We know that at the touchpoint level, the NPS is much more closely correlated to satisfaction, because it's really kind of more like, was this a good experience or not? It was meant to say, how does the experience that you've just had change loyalty? But it doesn't seem to be working that way. Now, there are companies who've worked for a very long time with bottom-up and top-down NPS, and they've created whole systems and people haven't gotten confused. They've managed this. There are also companies who've said, forget it, I'm not going to do NPS at a transactional level. I remember we wrote about Pitney Bowes. They used net satisfaction at the lower levels to not confuse people. So this is a question, a bit of an art and science, right? What do you think you can get away with? And the most important thing to do, though, is to explain what you're actually measuring with each of those metrics, so that people don't get confused because this is both called NPS. This is a completely different metric.
Yes,
they just happen
yes.
to be called the same thing.
Yes, you need a guide. You need a guide onto what the different measurements are and where you're doing it and what it means.
And if you can avoid it, it's probably not a bad idea either, because of the confusion that it causes. Right?
Cool. Brilliant. Oh, thank you so much, Maxi. That's been an amazing session. And some great questions from our attendees. So thank you very much for those and for interacting. As Maxi's already mentioned, she'll be joining us for our XI Forum in London on the 4th and 5th of October, where she'll be talking about the journey measurement framework and how to predict journey performance. So that's going to be a really great session. If you want to join us, please let us know. And with that, I think we will probably finish today, but that's been a fantastic session. Thank you very much, Maxi.
Very happy to.